Now, an interesting twist on this is a guy that's being called Standing Man. Hashtag Standing Man is gaining significant momentum on Twitter, and in Turkish it's hashtag Duran Adam, which also means, of course, Standing Man. Who is he? Well, I'm not quite sure. I do know it's this gentleman. So, and what's he doing? Well, people weren't quite sure about that in the beginning. He's in Taksim Square, and he started standing there, and he's got a bag. So the cops come by, and they start checking it out, and they're like, what the hell's going on with this guy? And it turns out that it was just a silent form of protest. And the cops start making sure that he doesn't have anything on him. They search him, they search his bag, they rifle through all of his stuff. And then people start to wonder, what in the world is this guy doing? Well, he was doing a standing protest. And here comes the interesting part. Then people got inspired, and they started standing. And they started standing next to him. And it grew, and it grew, and it grew. All of a sudden, there's a lot of standing men. And then people started standing in other places. Now, it's fascinating, right? But it has gained significant momentum in Taksim Square now. It reminds me of another square, Tiananmen Square. Remember when they rolled out the tanks and there was that one Chinese guy standing in front of the tanks and he wouldn't move? Well, in a sense, there he is right there. Standing Man started this and said, I'm going to stand here and you're not going to move me off this square. Water cannons, tear gas canisters, etc. be damned. And there's a sign made right there, Duran Adam, celebrating him. And once he started, other people started doing it along with him. And so all of a sudden, now there's a lot of people standing in that square saying, you're not going to move us. Fascinating development. We'll see what Erdogan's reaction to that is. Perhaps this is that old physics question. What happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object?
And now, here's a totally different thing that has also been going on. This is something that you never hear talked about on cable news. You've never heard me talk about it before, but bear with me here. I promise it pays off. A couple of years ago, when Claudia Rankine, when she started publishing her new work, it made a splash. It was kind of a literary sensation. She's an established artist, she's an established poet, but she was doing something sort of experimental that was having a big effect. It was really smacking people hard. It was getting a lot of attention and ultimately a lot of praise. And the subject of this new work that she had started publishing was race. It was everyday experiences of racism in the United States. And this book, Citizen, by Claudia Rankine, it comes out in October last year, and it has this haunting image on the cover, a disembodied black hoodie, or it's just the hood. A few days ago, presidential candidate Donald Trump held one of his rallies in Springfield, Illinois. It was a fairly typical Donald Trump presidential rally, even down to the point where there was a fairly typical Donald Trump rally protest in the crowd.
But you know, what's going to happen is Mexico is going to pay for the wall. I will tell you right now, they're going to pay for the wall. Get out of here.
So that happened fairly early on at this fairly typical Donald Trump rally. People watching started to notice this one very poised young woman who was calmly reading, flipping pages in a book that she was reading right behind Mr. Trump as he continued with his speech. Who is this woman? What's going on here? Some Donald Trump fans at one point interceded with her, and there was an interaction or two that didn't look all that pleasant. They ultimately roped in another person sitting near them to start complaining about this young woman. But she stuck with it, sometimes watching what Donald Trump was doing, but mostly reading right behind him. And by this point, people have started to notice online in Donald Trump's speech, it goes on and on and on, and she's sort of starting to become internet legend as the Donald Trump page turner. And then the Donald Trump rally in Illinois, it ends, and the Donald Trump supporters lead to their feet, and they're clapping and waving their political signs. And then she's still there, too, but she's waving that book. She's waving Claudia Rankine's book of poems. She's waving that book about how racism works now in everyday ways in our country. And now, from that, not quite a protest, just that unbowable presence, that young woman has become kind of a literary touchstone for these two stories coming together, these worlds colliding. And not just worlds colliding accidentally, but this young woman bringing about that collision herself, quietly, on purpose, in a way that drove people absolutely nuts. Who is she? Well, she joins us now for the interview. The young woman who was captured on camera behind Mr. Trump reading Claudia Rankine's book, Citizen, Jahari Osai Adusi. Is that an intention? Did you bring it as an intentional object? Did you mean to have Claudia Rankine's book there specifically? Is that part of what you sort of put together there in a conscious way?
I was reading it. We got there 2 hours before the event started, and I decided that I want some books to read, you know, to pass the time. I just want to stay in my seat. And that was one of the books that I brought, and I was actually reading it before the cameras, before the event started. So it was actually something that I brought to pass the time. But there was a shifting point.
Basic setup was, of course, these lunch counters were segregated based on race. They were whites only in many of these popular establishments and department stores. So that was an issue that meant something in daily life and also was so symbolic of the racism and the apartheid of the time. The civil rights movement said this is a very visible target. It's a soft target. I think we can make a big statement by planning an action here. Act one, you know, these folks sit down. They're mostly African American, some white allies. They've chosen how to dress. They're in their Sunday best. Their comportment is also very calm and rehearsed in that sense. And they just wait to be served or ask politely to be served, and they don't deviate from that script in any way. Act two, generally speaking, a large racist white mob that's offended by their very presence and their visible defiance of these laws comes up and starts to bully them, pick on them, even physically abuse them. And it could get very rough, in fact. And the people maintain nonviolent discipline while undergoing that, neither fighting nor fleeing. Act three, the all-white police force shows up. And, of course, there's the twist ending where they arrest not the offenders, but the victims of this violence. There's no catharsis in the stage or in the event. The catharsis will come through action in the street to change the situation. And this was a sociodrama that they created to stir up a great deal of agitation amongst folks who perhaps are on the other side of the country. It doesn't affect them, and now they're going to get a little more involved. Or, in the context of the Cold War, it escalated to the point where, with very few resources, they created these, like, spectacles of racist cruelty, and the state being on the wrong side, where heads of state were calling the White House, like the French and British heads of state were like, you know, we have a Cold War going on, right? What are you doing over there? You're making us look bad. They're the bad guys. They're the ones who have abused human rights on the other side. And it just always amazes me how they used performance as this kind of crowbar, this very deliberate performance as a force multiplier. They didn't have a lot of resources. It was through this kind of performance they were able to leverage so much more pressure upon the state to intervene, to make policy changes than otherwise.
The story of John Burge and Chicago's history of torture isn't just a story about the racist practices of Chicago's finest. It's also about the resistance that emerged in defiance of the powers that be. Fearless lawyering, courageous community activism, the resistance and resilience of the torture survivors themselves, who called their prison cells their war rooms and organized from behind bars, the relentlessness of their family members, especially their mothers, whose love for their sons was fierce and who came together and became a force to reckon with. The Chicago Torture Justice Memorials is about reckoning with our city's shameful history of torture. It's about seeking justice for the survivors, their family members, and our communities. We are an organizing collective of artists, educators, activists, and lawyers who come from diverse backgrounds. 2 of us have worked for justice for the torture survivors for the past 2 decades. We also have an actively engaged advisory board, including torture survivors, family members, and others who have worked to seek justice on behalf of the survivors for decades. Last year, our project issued an open call for speculative memorials that remember and interrogate the conditions that led to the racist torture of over 100 African American men and women under John Burge's command. This is not a contest. We want to urge everyone to imagine, dream, and submit a proposal. Toward this end, all submitted proposals will be exhibited at 1 or more venues throughout Chicago, including art galleries, community centers, public libraries, high schools, and a dedicated website. Our first exhibition, entitled Opening the Black Box, The Charge is Torture, it featured proposals from over 70 local, national, and international artists, educators, students, and activists who are working in a range of media. This exhibition attracted thousands of Chicagoans and garnered substantial media coverage. Through this work, we have brought scores of people into conversation with human rights activists about Chicago's history of torture and what can be done about it.
We need to come to grips with the fact that here in the city of Chicago has a very dark stain, and that stain is the denial for too long. So the memorial will finally be a way of saying, we acknowledge it now.
We thought about how do you memorialize these heinous events, and that is how we came up with this idea of the Chicago Police Torture Memorial Project. We will have roving exhibitions, so it's going to go throughout the city of Chicago. We want to have people continue to contribute their proposals. We want to continue to educate people, and we want to work to not only get the reparations for the torture survivors in city council by getting an ordinance passed. We want to get hearings for the guys behind bars, and we also want to start trying to make permanent various memorials so that this history does not get washed away.
The memorial, as a torture survivor, means a great deal to me. It means that our voices is being heard, and it means that America haven't forgot about us. You know, and I feel like coming here or go to an event is like a breath of fresh air.
You know, to have a memorial under any level that acknowledges torture is remarkable. It is a start to hopefully having people that are in the appropriate power to maybe take a look at this and to now correct it once and for all.
We see every submission as an act of solidarity with the torture survivors, and we see the open call and ongoing collection of proposals as an important part of an ongoing process of reparation.
Feel the rainbow, Newt. Stop the hate. Stop anti-gay politics. It's dividing our country and it's not fixing our economy. Do it like a man. That was fun. Nice to live in a free country.
First.
Yeah. I just always catch that myself.
How are you?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks again.
It's too bad they didn't.
Tom, were you right there?
Right in front of me.
What was oh, dude.
Thank you so much, and you will sign that.
What a creep. Oh. Hi. Thank you, sir.
A most unusual protest broke out at an insurance industry conference on Friday. CNN Jeannie Most tuned in.
Back then, there was the famous Annie. Tomorrow. And today, there's Public Option Annie. There's a name for the protest that took place at this insurance lobby conference.
It's technically called a guerrilla musical.
Suddenly, audience members started singing.
For killing the public option and blocking any hopes of its adoption. Thank you, sir.
They were members of the satirical group Billionaires for Wealth Care. The group has clever little slogans like, let them eat Advil.
If we get a public option, we can sniff out waste just like a dachshund.
Unlike a dachshund, security didn't sniff out the 5 singers and 6 camera people who infiltrated the insurance event.
And Olympia Snow said no, it croaked, right? No, the option's not dead or red.
You know, anybody can go to a town hall and just yell and scream and throw a tantrum. But we are trying a new dynamic, a new paradigm.
We really appreciate being invited to speak on this panel. A lot of you work with the insurance industry, of course. Insurance has become extremely worried about some grave new dangers to people that we're seeing in the world around us today. And I'm, of course, talking about climate change and the disasters that it brings. But I can personally guarantee you that level heads will always be able to turn lemons into lemonade. How about the Great Deluge? This world-ending disaster, literally, was surely seen as a terrible catastrophe by Noah's contemporaries and perhaps by Noah himself. Yet Noah was ready to seize the day, and at the end of that day, not only was there a whole new world, but Noah found himself with a monopoly of the animals. For those of us in positions of responsibility, however, who might have to take charge in a crisis, even more innovative solutions are necessary. I'd like now to introduce my colleague here, Dr. Northrop Goody, who's the head of our Emergency Products Development Unit at Halliburton. And Dr. Goody will be showing some mock-ups of some items that his unit has developed.
We want something that's going to be able to save a human being no matter what Mother Nature throws at him. And so this is the answer. This is the Halliburton Survivaball. It's 3 easy steps for deployment: suiting up, inflating, and of course, launching. Launching out of a building, and we have an artist's rendition of what it might be like in Houston when we launch our Survivaballs. In the event of extreme catastrophe, there might be a scarcity of resources. In this case, we've got a Survivaball here that's going up and extracting resources, in this case from an animal. And you don't want to be exposed to the elements, but you still want to be able to extract resources from, for example, a cow. They're going to be able to go underwater, rated at 50 feet. They can be used in any condition. It doesn't matter whether you're in a landslide in California or even in the Arctic. Of course, any other conditions, whether tsunamis or tornadoes, the Survivaball is designed to withstand.
We'll be happy to take any questions. So, yep.
I mean, in my mind, this clearly also plays right into terrorist attacks. What kind of defense mechanisms being envisioned against biological, chemical, radiological attack?
If you could demonstrate the turtle position, please, that would be great. Basically, if you duck down...
I'll assume they'll have some kind of bubble mask or something.
Yeah, visor, heads-up display, the whole thing.
That's very cool. So. We'll need them. Most of the,
Can you sum up for me, what do you hope to accomplish by this occupation?
An American Indian nation comprising of all the tribes, including the Alaskans.
Why Alcatraz?
Everybody can see it. On one end of the country, you have the Statue of Liberty, and it's just the opposite. You have a true reality of liberty.
Do you think you have the legal right to claim the island? And why?
Well, you're talking about 2 different societies now. in my society or in the Indian society? Yes, we do. Hi, I have a proclamation I'd like to read you. We, the Native Americans, reclaim this land known as Alcatraz Island in the name of all American Indians by right of discovery. We wish to be fair and honorable in our dealings with the Caucasian inhabitants of this land, and hereby offer the following treaty. We will purchase said Alcatraz Island for $24 in glass beads and red cloth, a precedent set by the white man's purchase of a similar island about 300 years ago. We know that $24 in trade goods for these 16 acres is more than was paid when Manhattan Island was sold, but we know that land values have risen over the years. Our offer of $1.24 per acre is greater than the 47 cents per acre the white man is now paying the California Indians for their land. We will give to the inhabitants of this island a portion of that land for their own, to be held in trust by the American Indian government. For as long as the sun shall rise and the rivers go down to the sea, to be administered by the Bureau of Caucasian Affairs. We will further guide the inhabitants in the proper way of living. We will offer them our religion, our education, our life ways, in order to help them achieve our level of civilization and thus raise them and all their white brothers up from their savage and unhappy state. We offer this treaty in good faith and wish to be fair and honorable in our dealings with all white men.
Okay, so in presenting this to me, what do you want me to do with it? Do you have anything in mind?
Hold on to it.
Okay.
React to it.
Okay. But they say they'll continue to press their claim for the island and the center they could build here by legal means. That claim, they say, is a just one and a fair one. Mike Mills for Newswatch on Alcatraz.